All right, well, we have some people joining in, so we can just go ahead and get started then. Hello, everybody. My name is Sasha Kelchip-Korn. I'm Executive Director here at Realm of Caring, and we have a very special Q&A webinar today. We have Michael Backus here, who is co-founder and Chief Product Officer at Perfect, as well as author of Cannabis Pharmacy. Michael, how are you? Thank you so much for giving us this great honor and joining us today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So we are so lucky to have your insight today to answer our questions just about what's really inside our cannabis. I know that's how we framed it. And so we had a really great response from our community. We did some outreach for some questions. So some questions did pour in. I'm going to go through those here. But for those of us who are watching, I also will have my Q&A box open. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to use that there, and we can get Michael's insight on those as well. So shall we?
Sure, jump in.
All righty. So let's see. So first, I thought it'd be great to start with this because it spoke to your story a little bit more personally. This individual asked, can you speak to how your migraines led to you to look towards cannabis as a medicine?
Well, when you got migraines and you're not getting relief from conventional medication, honestly, I would have rubbed a frog on my head if there was a chance it could have reduced the discomfort of having those headaches. In my case, my neurologist recommended that I try cannabis. It had had a reputation going back to the 19th century for being effective for relieving some symptoms related to migraine type headaches. And I kind of laughed it off. I mean, I just thought, I hadn't used cannabis since college, and I hadn't really thought of it as a medicine. And but when I used it, I found that it reduced the severity of what's called the prodrome of the headache, the aura that lets you know that you're going to get a migraine. It's usually some type of visual disturbance, and it broke this. It stopped it, and so I wouldn't get the headache. And it doesn't work every time, and I don't have to use much to get the effect. But it is effective for me. And I started to ask why, like, how does this work? And nobody could answer the question. And so I just started doing research online and asking neurologists and asking people who were studying cannabis. And it just was this, I went down the rabbit hole and just got fascinated with how cannabis works. And so I've spent the next 16 years trying to figure it out. Still figuring it out.
Yes, amazing. And, I have family members with migraines. And myself, I've only had a couple in my lifetime, and I can't imagine for someone, I know how debilitating that they are. So it's amazing that you were able to find a solution for yourself and move on to help more people with it. It's just incredible. So the next question I thought would be great to ask would be to sort of introduce a little bit about Perfect as well, because people might not be as familiar because it is only available in California right now. But this question asked, what's the difference between cannabis-derived and botanical terpenes, and which are used by Perfect?
Well, that's a really interesting question because we're just now starting to find out what the difference is. There's always been this feeling that there's some kind of difference. Though, frankly, a lot of people were suspicious that that difference was real. The feeling was a molecule's a molecule, depending on where it comes from. But it turns out that cannabis terpenes and botanical terpenes can differ in one key aspect, which is there's a thing in chemistry called stereochemistry. It has to do with the kind of what they call the chirality of different molecules. You can have a left-handed limonene and a right-handed limonene, and they're like hands. They're identical, but they're flipped. And so it turns out that some plants that synthesize terpenes will synthesize a terpene that has a specific handedness. And cannabis will synthesize a terpene that has the opposite handedness. So there's no difference if you're using botanical terpenes in something, provided that if you want to have a cannabis identical experience, you use terpenes that have been tested to show the same handedness as those produced by the cannabis plant. A good example is lemon or pinene. My former colleague, Mark Lewis, did a study with his lab, Macro Research, recently, where they analyzed cannabis terpenes versus carts that contained botanical terpenes to see if they could see this difference. And in pinene, they did. They had a right-handed pinene in one place, a combination, what they call a racemic mixture of right-handed and left-handed alpha pinene in this product, as opposed to cannabis that only produces one of those. And so if you want to use botanical terpenes in a product, all you have to do is ensure that you've got the same thing the cannabis plant is actually producing, rather than something that it's not. That way you have, it may not be safer to use right or left, but in the case of some left and right-handed versions of molecules, one hand can be slightly toxic in comparison to the other one. And so to avoid that issue, you'd always want to use something that had the right stereochemistry. And typically at Perfect, we want to stay away from botanical terpenes. And if we can avoid them, in the case of linalool, one of the terpenes that we like to work with, which just isn't produced in enough quantity by any of the cannabis varieties we can get our hands on, then we'll use the same chirality linalool in our product as produced by the cannabis plant. And within the next year, we'll have a cannabis plant that produces enough linalool that we can just use linalool that's been extracted from cannabis. So
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's incredible because terpene knowledge is becoming just more and more people, we found anyway at Realm of Caring, are becoming more aware of what terpenes are in their cannabis, and they're looking for specific terpenes once they do their research. And so another question that was asked is, do you see terpene degradation as we see with some cannabinoids over time? So will they lose their potency or effectiveness over time, whether they be natural to the plant or be added in later?
Yeah. Matter of fact, if they're added, the problem is if you just add terpenes, they're just going to evaporate. Typically, they don't really like to stick around. And one of the things that we've done at Perfect is to try to protect our terpene content. We very, very specifically blend our products together to have certain terpene content, and therefore we want to keep it around. And yes, especially the lighter terpenes, what are called the monoterpenes, like limonene, myrcene, pinene, the pinenes, and terpinolene, super delicate. And it's not so much they degrade, and they will degrade, they evaporate. All right. And so they just don't hang around, and they're very fragile, and they're very sensitive to vapor pressure changes. So whether or not how warm something is and how humid something is, those can really impact it. So what we try to do is we try to kind of get our blended cannabis oils with those terpenes onto the plant and help them stay there by leveraging some tricks that the plant itself uses to keep them around. Some waxes that the plant uses to help keep basically terpenes inside of the trichome head on the plant. So we're trying to leverage a little bit of that to keep stuff around. But yes, they do degrade. That's why we recommend keep your cannabis cold and in a dark place. We recommend in your refrigerator. Yeah, and with as little headspace as possible. You just don't want to take a joint and leave it out in the refrigerator, because the truth is the terps are going to evaporate relatively quickly off it. But in a tight, small container appropriate for the size of the joint, it'll help keep things around longer for sure.
Great advice. So when it comes to the blends that you use at Perfect, what have you found that complement each other? What terpenes are you using in combination for specific blends?
Good question. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically put together terps that the plant doesn't put together in one plant, hence blending. So if you try to get a high limonene variety of cannabis, you'll very rarely find a single plant that has high amounts of limonene and high amounts of terpinolene in the same plant. And what we're trying to do basically is blend things together to get terp combinations that you couldn't get from a single strain of flower at your local shop. And that's what we do, because what we've noticed is we've noticed different effects. And we've also noticed that you can kind of take some of the rough edges off of THC by having an intact entourage of other things, terpenes and minor cannabinoids.
And that actually reminds me, there's a question that was a little bit down. And it was asking about, because you just mentioned terpene maybe negating some side effects or the harshness of THC. So this question asked specifically about CBD. How does CBD negate unwanted side effects of THC? But I guess it's kind of a two-parter then. How do those terpenes, or how does CBD negate any unwanted side effects or the harshness of THC?
In most natural medicines, including cannabis, there are a lot of active compounds. And one of the reasons that people are drawn towards these plants as medicines is they contain an entourage of compounds that play nice together. That if you isolated some of those compounds, they may not be the most pleasant medicine to take. And so I'm a big believer in big orchestras, as opposed to THC alone, which to me, I've said before, is kind of like a bass solo, wears out its welcome pretty fast. And so, THC by itself, it's really interesting. THC has been an approved prescription medicine in the United States for over a decade, under the brand name Marinol. And nobody abuses it. Nobody ever breaks into a pharmacy and goes, "Give me your Marinol." And the reason is that most people who've been prescribed Marinol can't wait to get off it, because it makes them anxious, hypervigilant. It's an unpleasant, THC by itself is an unpleasant experience. And what's interesting is you have to kind of acclimate yourself to a pure THC high, which some people who do intense concentrations of THC, in fact, end up doing. They basically get used to the feeling. And then, just like certain foods that you don't necessarily like the taste of, but if you eat them enough, you'll eat them. I think THC is a little bit that way. I like the buffet personally. I don't want to eat arugula all day. And nothing wrong with arugula, but I feel like THC is a little bit like arugula. It's a lot better in a salad.
Mm-hmm. Great analogy. I have some more questions they're kind of going towards cultivars, THC, CBD blends, but I did have one come in from the audience that's on the terpene topic. So this individual is asking, what are the best terpenes for mindfulness and introspection?
Oh, that's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on the nature of your particular monkey mind. Okay, so if you're hyper vigilant, you want something that's going to relax you. Okay, If you're scattered, you want something that's going to focus you, et cetera, et cetera. So the way I usually do it is a little bit of THC, always with a little bit of CBD. That's my base. And then on top of that, I'll choose limonene for mood elevation. Linalool for relaxation. Caryophyllene for energy. Terpinolene and pinene together for focus. Pinene protects the hippocampus in the brain. The hippocampus in the brain makes memories, responsible for learning. THC interferes with how it works, which is why when you take a dab, you can forget where your keys are, forget where your feet are, you can forget where the floor is. And so what you want is you want something that's going to offset what else you're taking. And so I like the mood elevation of limonene. I mean, Happy Camper is my favorite blend at Perfect, which is terpinolene, limonene, a little bit of linalool, and a little bit of caryophyllene. And that combo, along with THC, really is great for just putting a smile on your face. And it's been really consistent. And I was trying to recreate a variety of cannabis that I used to have access to. It was a variant of a strain called Trainwreck. And the ironic thing about Trainwreck was considered a pure sativa, a stimulating strain. And it really didn't mess you up that much. It had a really pretty clear psychoactivity. But Plainwreck was the laugh track version of Trainwreck. It really made you laugh. And I couldn't find it anymore. It was in California for a while, it was in Colorado for a while, and then it basically fell off the radar. So that was my attempt to blend it back.
That's amazing. And it actually is perfect because two people right in a row asked which one of Perfect's products would I try for that feeling. And so you answered it with Happy Camper.
No.
Yeah, thank you.
And,
So yeah.
Each one of our blends pretty much says the thing about Perfect is it's designed to make your decision as a consumer a little bit more trustworthy. So you can just look at the label and it says what it's going to do. Happy Camper. Oh, what's that going to do? You know, pick me up. What's that going to do? Nightcap. What's that going to do? Sex pot. What's that going to do? Now, sex pot's interesting because it's deceptive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really designed for intimacy. It's designed to relax you and maintain agency. So you don't do something you feel bad about doing later. And we thought that was a great intimacy product, but it's great in general. I mean, it's great for when you're working or anything where you want some elevation, but you want to maintain focus and clarity and cognition and all that.
Yeah, I love how you explain that. I love how you guys explain sex pot, that it's just like, you know, one of the best ones that are out there just because of, like you said, maintaining agency. I think that is so important and so valuable to know. So going into some specific conditions, we did have a question about when it comes to cancer. So we do have, a lot of individuals who are suffering from many debilitating conditions. And this individual asked, could you suggest a particular cultivar for cancer? Would it be high THC? And what other cannabinoids and terpenes would it contain? And what would dosing look like? So it's a three-parter question. So microdosing, megadosing, we've heard different things. What's your take?
Okay. It's not a question really that can be answered without getting into a lot of specifics. And the reason is that cancer is not one disease. Okay, cancer is 500 diseases under the tent of cancers. Okay, and what's wild is you can't even say a cancer is a cancer by where it's being expressed in the body. So there are people who have, breast cancers in different places of their body than their breasts. It has nothing to do with male or female. It has, the thing you've got to find out is what is the type of tumor you specifically have. And the reason that's important, and the reason that I won't give blanket advice about cancer treatment with cannabinoids, is that some cannabinoids can suppress the growth of cancer cells. But a different cannabinoid can accelerate the growth of those cancer cells. So you have to choose really, really carefully. And the idea that just taking a fat dose of a broad spectrum cannabis product like our RSO, rich sentinel, is going to work for everybody, suffers from survivorship bias. The only people who are telling you it worked are the people who survived the treatment. The people who didn't survive the treatment aren't here to say, you know something, that oil didn't work for me. So it's just really, really important to do some research, talk to your oncologist, find out exactly what kind of tumor you're looking at, and most patients these days know, and then go online and do some research because it's going to be cell studies. It's not going to be studies in humans, and it's not often going to be studies in animals. It's going to be studies of how certain cannabinoids affect the growth and occasionally the spread of specific types of cancer cells. And that's as good as you're going to get right now. But if you've run out of options, that is an option that remains. You should talk to your doctor about it. Most doctors are very sympathetic to discussions about alternative treatments for cancer. And most of them will recommend correctly that you get the best odds with your treatment, that you don't necessarily abandon conventional treatment when you add alternative treatments. And if, I used to work with Steve Jobs at Apple, and Steve would have survived, very likely, his pancreatic cancer had he not gone immediately to alternative approaches and ignored the conventional approaches that were available to him. And he said that later in his life.
Wow.
To his
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. It's heavy, but you're absolutely right. It's not just like a one size fits all. It's
not, and
Mhm.
it's easy to think that it's one size fits all, when in fact it's the most personalized form of personalized medicine.
Mhm.
And the thing is that if you're going to jump in to alternative treatments, you've got to become an expert, because your doctor, no matter how attentive your doctor may be, she does not have enough time to spend every second on your case.
Mhm.
You do. And you really should dive in.
Yes. And so sticking with that kind of specific conditions, because I want to address some of these questions that were asked. This person asks, is there a role for cannabis therapy in the treatment or palliative care for dementia and Alzheimer's?
So it's really interesting. There's a doctor named Reynolds, who was Queen Victoria's physician, and who, contrary to the legend, did not prescribe cannabis for Queen Victoria's menstrual issues.
Really?
But he did work in a really famous hospital in London where they had inpatient dementia patients. And one of his dementia patients would get up every night, close to midnight, and pack up all of his drawers and closets and head off home, which he didn't have anymore. He didn't have a home. He was living in the hospital. And so Dr. Reynolds used a dose of Indian hemp tincture, which is basically marijuana tincture, THC tincture, to get the person to calm down. One of the things that's associated with dementia and Alzheimer's can be agitation. And THC is really, really good for those kinds of agitation. As prophylaxis before you develop those things, if you have a genetic predisposition towards them, we're learning a lot more about things you should do to avoid developing it if you have a genetic predisposition to develop it. these diseases. One of the things that's really fascinating that I just read about, totally unrelated to cannabis, is that wear your hearing aids. If you're starting to lose your hearing, people who don't wear their hearing aids seem to progress faster towards dementia and Alzheimer's. And
Wow.
yeah, that's new. You can look it up. But what I would recommend is I would recommend small oral doses, not heroic doses, but small oral doses, because the thing is that if you give somebody somebody who's cannabis naive and older, a high dose of THC, what you're typically going to see is you're going to see them have trouble with balance, and they have a tendency to have brittle bones, and therefore you could end up with somebody not only having dementia but needing a hip replacement.
Wow. That is fascinating. So speaking to that, starting out with the micro amounts of THC, can you speak a little bit to THC tolerance?
Sure. THC tolerance is caused by, so one of the things that THC does is it mimics the behavior of the body's own endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoid system is interesting because the endocannabinoid system is a system within your body that regulates physiology, whether it's heart rate, blood pressure, appetite, bowel transit, yada, 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 neurotransmission, all of these things. And your body does not store endocannabinoids. It makes them when it needs them, and when it's done with them, it metabolizes them. So it's an on-demand system to balance physiology. THC in cannabis mimics endocannabinoids. And when you take a systemic dose of THC by inhaling it, by eating it, by rubbing it on your skin and getting it through your skin, the body reacts to large doses over time by reducing the density of receptors that are available. That's tolerance. That's when you need a larger dose to get what you previously could get with a smaller dose. And it's a slippery slope, and you can get horribly tolerant to the effects of THC. And sometimes that's what you're trying to do. And sometimes it's inadvertently what you try to do, what you end up doing, because you get bad advice. You're told to pick the strongest preparation and take the most of it you can withstand. There is kind of a social cachet to being able to withstand a high dose of THC. It's interesting that we don't really have it for tequila. You know, nobody really wears it as a badge of honor when they drink a quart of tequila. They usually use it as a cautionary tale to others. While with THC, it's like, bro, I can handle my high. And but at a cost. You end up spending more to get less. That's the bottom line. Anytime anybody's steering you towards a high THC product as being a high quality product, they are just lying to you because they don't know what they're talking about. We're in an industry that's relatively new. People aren't particularly educated in how these substances work. And the only gauge they have for quality is the amount of THC on the label, which I've said many times is kind of like judging wine by its alcohol content. You don't. You shouldn't cannabis either.
And so that kind of goes with this other question where someone said that speaking to that bad advice, they said, I've had trouble in dispensaries with getting help choosing a product. How do I know what product is going to be right for me?
You know, we all love it when we go into a store and you can grab a salesperson and they can answer your question. But we all know that in most cases, there are limits to how complicated a question you can ask and reasonably expect to get a helpful answer back. All right. I don't walk into Vons and ask them which Burgundy is going to go well with the soul I'm going to cook for dinner. because the chances are not good they're going to know the answer. Who knows if anybody would know the answer to that question. But the point being that we kind of expect dispensaries to know more than they're taught. All right. Usually you get a job in a dispensary because you can smoke weed, not because you really know that much about it, and its effects and its side effects. And so I invite you to do what I've done, which is, again, lots of research material out there. Some of it's actually fun to read.
Yes.
So
And we had another question come in that
I'm
kind
going
of,
to jump for my power cord here to make sure.
yeah,
this
sure.
phone call didn't.
And I will try not to keep you for too much longer because I
No,
know
no,
we're
it's
just
not
about
good.
at time.
The truth is, I switched tables here, so just let me get it back on here, and it should be fine. Yes, we're good. you.
Okay, good. So I actually just have a couple more questions, but this one came in and it's, this person asked, besides picking the right product to consume, what are some other ways to enhance the experience, such as types of foods to eat, movies to watch, supplements, etc.?
Good question.
Mhm.
I have a favorite supplement that is a fatty acid that is related to your body's endocannabinoids and what it makes them from in your body. It's called PEA, palmitoyl ethanolamine. If you go to Amazon and look up PEA supplement, you'll find it. It's really interesting because it appears to help your body use anandamide, one of its endocannabinoids, to reduce pain, low-level background pain. And as you get older, you can develop aches and pains, or you work out, and you develop aches and pains, or you get older and you work out and you develop aches and pains. And I really like PEA in combination with things like CBD and THC. Movies, wow. If you want to watch a great movie high, watch Bullet Train with Brad Pitt. It's excellent. Or watch.
It's on my list. I do need to watch that. It's good.
What's the other one? Everything All at Once. The new movie by the Daniels.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's a brilliant. Everything All at Once. Do you remember the title?
Everything everywhere.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. I left out the everywhere. Now I have what's great. I have an AI who sits next to me. Yeah, Madison. I can just ask her questions.
That's fantastic.
That's really cool.
I need a Madison to turn on my lights in here because it's getting dark.
She doesn't do that.
Oh man.
So yeah, so those are two movies that I really like. I love listening to music. When I'm using cannabis, either medicinally or recreationally, it definitely, I think, increases my appreciation of it. I've just been watching a Apple TV documentary about Louis Armstrong, who was quite a fan of cannabis, and that's dealt with in the movie, in this documentary. And it's a fantastic documentary about a brilliant musician.
Amazing. So I had a question come in, or a couple questions from one individual who was wondering what your favorite aspect of your career is in the cannabis industry, and also wondering what's next for Perfect, because they're not in California.
Well, what's next for Perfect is to go beyond California. We've been lucky enough to be engaged by a bunch of companies in the last year that want to explore bringing our approach to other markets. So we're actively doing this. My favorite thing by far is trying to figure out how to make a cannabis blend that does what I want it to do, or what I've been charged with getting it to do. And it's really hard. Like in the case of Sex Pot, it took almost 2 years.
Wow.
And lots of false starts. And then, but what's great is that finally, when you give it to somebody and they go, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever smoked. Oh, this is just the best. Oh, it's incredibly gratifying. It's really,
Mhm.
yeah, makes me love what I do even more than I do. And I also love the team. The team we have at Perfect is a miracle. And yeah, every single person on our team brings something truly unique and incredibly special to the table. And that really makes the band work.
Yeah, you guys do have a very, very special team. And so we're so lucky to just be working alongside you and furthering our missions together. So that's what I have as far as questions. I was leaving it open in case anyone had any last moment ones. But anything that you could leave our Realm of Caring clients or viewers with before we
Well,
sign off?
I've been following the Realm of Caring game for quite a while.
Yeah.
And the thing that I really always admired about it was that when CBD was really, really, really hard to get, and the people who needed it really, really, really needed it, it was cool that Realm of Caring stepped up and rallied around some people in need. And I always really admired that about Realm of Caring. So it was a real easy yes for me to get
Yeah.
involved because
Well,
what
thank
you do.
you. Thank you so much. Yes, we have a special lady who's our board president still, our co-founder, Heather Jackson, who is a part of that. And so, yeah, we are all so happy to be here. And just like you, we're in the right place. It makes us happy. It feels good to help people out. And then I did have one other question sneak in. They asked if there's a next perfect product. Is there one that's in production to come out?
No, what you're probably going to see us do is you might see us modify a couple of our blends a little bit because we learned something in developing Sex Pop that we think we could move into other blends. And that is this idea of effectively using CBD as a seatbelt in your sports car. So what we've learned with CBD is that CBD really can, at relatively small levels, significantly impact the quality and character of the effects we're getting with our blends. And we think that there's really something to it. And so we may look to kind of tweak our blends a little bit to make them better. So look for Happy Camper 2.0. So,
Yes, amazing. Well, if anybody else watching has additional questions, you can always give them to Realm of Caring at info@realmofcaring.org and we can make sure they get to Michael. But Michael, you still do an Ask Michael with Perfect as well, which can be found on the Perfect-Blends website. And so people can submit that way as well still. But I want to thank you so much. This is really incredible, very insightful, and I'm just so glad to see all the engagement and everybody asking the questions and figuring out how to enhance their buying experience. So thank you.
I really enjoyed being here. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
All right, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.